The broadcast is now starting. All attendees are in listen-only mode.
Hello, everyone. I'm Michael Batch, Chair of SLA's Competitive Intelligence Division, and I'd like to welcome you to our webinar today, What's the Big Deal About Big Data?, hosted by Aurora WDC and sponsored by Manzama. Before we get started today, if you haven't already, please visit our website at ci.sla.org to register for our future webinars. On Tuesday, March 18th at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll be hosting Buying and Selling Information, a guide for information professionals and salespeople to build mutual success. And on Thursday, April 3rd at 12 p.m. Eastern Time, we'll be hosting a webinar called $1 Billion Surprises, How and Why Business War Games Pay Off. Our presenter today is Mark Hinkle, co-founder, president, and COO of Manzama, and is responsible for running the day-to-day operations of the company. Mark, thanks for being with us today. We look forward to your webinar. As attendees, you can submit questions via the question panel, and if time allows, we'll address as many as we can at the end. If not, we'll also be sending out a follow-up email with Mark's contact information. With that, Mark, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Michael, and thanks to everyone for joining us today. And we're going to be talking about big data today, which is a topic that we hear a lot about in our world. And in terms of agenda, what I thought I would do first is just sort of define what big data is, because I think there's a lot of people have a lot of different impressions about what big data is, and it's a bit of a nebulous term. I'm going to go into the problem of big data and go back in time a little bit to just kind of acquaint everyone or remind everyone with how we got to where we are today. Maybe the most interesting part of the demonstration will be what should we do about it, and I'll be showing a couple of examples of how we can really leverage big data within organizations. And then, how can you make or how can you find actionable insights out of the massive information that is big data? So let's start with a definition of what is big data. And, to really kind of put it into layman's terms, it's basically data sets that exceed the boundaries and sizes of what we're able to process or what we're able to handle. And there's so much information in the world today, that problem is only getting worse or better, depending on how you're looking at it. And there's a lot of great information out in the world, and really it comes down to relevance. What might be interesting or important to one person may be completely uninteresting and irrelevant to another person. So the trick is finding the relevant and important information in that mass of data to you, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So again, these content sources are fragmented. They're disparate. They're growing. We've got new informational sources coming online every day. Social media has been the biggest and latest one. And as I mentioned earlier, there's a lot of great information in those sources, but there's a lot of noise too. And I think what a lot of the frustration and stress that we all live with in today's world, from a professional perspective, is trying to cut through that clutter and to get to what is beneficial to us. And obviously there's what we're able to keep up with, and there's just this, you can see that continuum just going up and up and up, and again, that's not gonna stop. I think we all know that. I thought this was an interesting quote from Harvard Business Review, where they did a poll, and basically they found that fewer than 44% of employees stated that they knew where to find the right information to do their jobs. And half of those employees thought that information was in an unusable format. And you can see in the little quote cloud over there that the best companies avoid this problem by using infographics or the visualization of information. And that's something that we do here at Manzama, and it really helps with that the ability to understand large amounts of data when you can see it without sort of vetting through every headline and reading every article. When you can see what the sum or the mass of that data means, sort of all in one place. So I'm wondering if this looks familiar to anyone. You know, I'm guessing that it does. This is actually an email from one of our clients using the system. This person happens to be a salesperson at Oracle, and you can see what they were doing to try to keep up with their clients. And you know, they've got Wall Street Journal alerts, they've got Google alerts, and this would give anyone a headache. It's giving me one just looking at it. But they were doing the best they could to keep up with the current means available, to keep up with what's happening around, what's transpiring around their clients and their prospects. And I think the method for which we're all trying to do this today is broken. You know, we're doing active searching, we're setting up alerts on things, we're getting newsletters. A lot of the information in those newsletters is irrelevant, some of it is relevant, but there's a tremendous amount of time that goes into vetting through that information. And I think it causes a lot of stress for a lot of us who are information professionals to do that for ourselves, let alone to be able to do it on behalf of others. And so what I thought I'd do now is let's take a trip back in time to how we got here. We really started back in the early 90s with the dawn of the internet, and this was, I think we all agree, a fantastic time or occurrence that happened in our world. You know, information started to be available to anyone, and more information started to get put onto the internet, which was a great thing, except it also, with that, came a problem, which there was just a massive amount of information. And then came along search engines in about the mid-90s, because we soon realized that we would need methods to find information within that massive information, within that massive big data. Then came along in the early 2000s curation services, newsletters, alerting services, things that would help us so that we just didn't have to go searching for things, but that we could find things as well, and that things were brought to our attention. And there were a lot of companies that made a lot of money and were very successful at sort of giving, you know, aggregating the information and giving their spin or their annotation or their editorial spin on what that information all meant. And then we fast forward to the mid-2000s and, of course, the dawn of social media. And this exacerbated that problem of more and more information, but it was also a very good thing, because as we all know in the world today, we can get information very quickly with the likes of Twitter, and no longer is the information, the power of the distribution of information in the hands of a few, but it's really in the hands of all of us now. Then came along listening platforms, and you know, these were services that started to tell companies what consumers were saying about their brand and their products. Radian 6 was an early one. They were purchased by Salesforce.com. And again, these companies had tremendous success because companies soon understood that they needed, or organizations, if this was let's say a law firm or an accounting firm, they needed to understand what the perception was out in the world of their organization and of their products. And these products are really, or you know, these companies are really based more around consumer sentiment. Doing sentiment analysis. And then we started our company back in 2011, and we really realized that there was a need for the professional to be able to find highly relevant information. And this doesn't have as much to do with consumer sentiment as it does with the ability to understand massive amounts of information and to make that a scalable exercise across the organization. Because if you ask any two people what they care about in an organization, chances are you're going to get two different answers. So what I'm going to talk a lot today about, you'll hear me talk about, is not just the visualization of information, but the personalization of information as well. And this is sort of where we are today, is that behavioral changes are happening. And you see all the adjectives here on the left and on the right. And on the left is sort of where we've been. on the right is where we're going. And, you know, people really expect that the expectation in the world is that service providers will be more proactive, that things will be more, information will be more personalized and more verticalized and more suggestive in nature and more relevant. And I think this is a nice illustration of how things are changing. So what should we do about it? And you know, today's strategies in business demand new methods, and you can see the traditional approach on the left there versus the new approach. And I think, as we all know, the traditional approach was to, at least in the context of big data, was to try to get all of our internal systems to talk to one another, try to get a handle on that customer information that was within our internal systems and how we could leverage that for marketing campaigns or whatever it was. However, it was such a large amount of data that we would usually only update it or analyze it quarterly, semi-annually, maybe monthly. And there was a lot of outside analysts that we had to bring in to help us to understand what that data meant. The new approach is that you know, we're looking for solutions that combine internal and external data. And again, that's something that Mazama does quite well. And we're also looking for real time, not, you know, we need to run a report and that's going to take a long time. And then we're going to distribute that report. That's going to take a lot of resources to build that report. We're looking at the ability to understand what that data means very quickly so that we can make strategic decisions based on what we're seeing within that data. And then more and more, this exercise is being done by folks in-house. And not only is that more cost-effective, but it's better for the organization to be able to not have to rely on external organizations or people to help them interpret the data. If they can just figure out what that data means, if they can do that quickly, and again, if they can go not just within the organization, but outside the organization, and have a better understanding of sort of what it all means. So I want to talk about some consequences and opportunities created from these changes that we're seeing. And again, we've seen this person's email box before, and I'm going to go through a few examples, not just Manzama, but a few others, of companies that are helping professionals to deal with this problem. And you know, what I'm showing you here is that Schnitzer Steel, that client, but instead of getting a bunch of alerts, we're able to look at spikes. This is basically a graph that's measuring the number of mentions in and around Schnitzer Steel over a 1-month time frame. And right away, I can see that there were 5 or 6 peaks where significant things happened that I need to be paying attention to. And I can click into those peaks and I can see what those related stories were. So instead of, you know, trying to set up a Google alert every day and you know, which human behavior is that if we don't read that Google alert that day, we're not going to go back and read it, and did we miss something? And trying to do that, you know, across all of the things that we care about, if you can visualize that data, it really makes that exercise a lot less stressful and a lot more productive to be able to understand what's happening. This was a great example in our system where, you know, basically you started to see, you know, we hear a lot about predictive analytics, and I think this is going to be a pretty good illustration of that. This was someone who was tracking the Fair Credit Reporting Act. And you can see, again, what we're looking at here is blog traffic, and that's measured by that orange graph on the left there where the arrow is. And you can see how that blog traffic starts to pick up. We're looking at a 6-month view here over the course of a few months. And what was happening was there were industry pundits and experts who were saying, you know, if the Federal Trade Commission comes down and decides, hands down a decision that data brokers fall under the jurisdiction of the Fair Credit Reporting Act, there's going to be just a slew of legislation or of litigation rather that follows. And this is going to have huge implications for data brokers, and potentially opportunities if you're let's say a law firm that is serving or that is has data brokers as clients. And so the next slide, what this is showing is the day that the FTC came down with their decision on May 7th. And you can see how the system picked up a huge spike in articles that day. That was what that big story was. And this is where it gets fascinating on the next slide. You'll see over here on the key, the blue is dockets. And dockets are, of course, summaries of litigation filings. And you can see how the litigation just went through the roof. So, those those companies that were in that in the realm of data, or those data brokers, data brokerage companies, I should say, as well as the law firms that serve those or have those data brokers as clients, those of them that understood that this was happening and this was imminent were able to protect and position themselves in a way to either, like I said, protect themselves or to really sort of benefit from what was to come. So here's another example of our system. This is a tag cloud. We've all seen tag clouds. I used to think these things were really kind of silly and not that useful. But in this context, they're very useful because we're looking at a couple of companies here in Chevron and Duke Energy, and the system is going through every single article it's picking up around Chevron or Duke Energy over the course of a month. It's going through every paragraph, every sentence, every word of those articles, and it's going to look for commonly mentioned terms that it sees in all those articles. So if it sees something like Progress Energy in conjunction with Duke, or acquisition, or with regards to Chevron, Dodd-Frank, or summary judgment, it's going to surface those things and bring them to the user's attention. And this goes to the suggestive nature of big data, or systems that can understand big data. It's not just what, those things that we know we're looking for, we should know about within that mass of big data. But then there's those things that are also in there that we don't know about, yet could be very advantageous for us to know. So I'm going to go into, we talked about the visualization of information now, and I want to talk about the personalization of information. And first I want to talk about some consumer examples, because these are ones that we're probably all familiar with. And Amazon probably is the first one that comes to mind. This was my counterpart, our VP of Marketing, Lisa Flynn, and I knew that Lisa loves cats, and obviously I knew she loved clothing too. I didn't know that she likes cats on clothing. But now I know that, and you all know that too. But, this is basically, she had obviously been in Amazon looking at costumes or books on cats. I don't know what it was. But Amazon knew that they wanted to offer her these cat shirts, right? And I think we're all familiar with this in today's world. Many of us have Netflix or Pandora, and these are really big data applications. They're starting to understand who we are, what kind of things we like, and they're doing this on a massive scale for all of their consumers. When we go into the professional realm, we get examples of some other applications. I think most of us are familiar with LinkedIn. Again, they're going through massive amounts of data in terms of what people do, who their connections are, and they're serving that up for all of us to be able to connect with one another and to benefit from. Bordex is another company that we're pretty impressed with. They're out of the UK. What Bordex does, similar to relationship science, is they do relationship matrices. So they will look at, and again, this goes back to systems talking to internal and external data. They will find out a relationship matrix for your organization. And so, if you find out that, if you're trying to get some business with a company, let's say, they will look through that company as well as your own organization and find where there might be matches. So they might find out that, Joe down in procurement, his sister-in-law is actually Jane, who's a salesperson at this company that you're trying to get into. And so they sort of do a mapping for you, and you could really, again, start to leverage the massive amount of data that they're sort of trending through. One of the things that we hang our hat on at Benzama is the personalization of business intelligence. We create personalized dashboards and personalized email alerts for everyone at the company. As I mentioned earlier, if you ask two professionals what they care about, you probably get two different answers. So it doesn't do them any good to give them, here are the top stories in and around this industry today. That can be helpful to a degree, but each of them will have a different mix about the things that they care about. And you need to start to provide these applications across the enterprise as well. I think we talk about big data and lots of other sort of systems that we use inside companies. Historically, those have been usually purchased and used by one group. And if you look at the consumer applications that we use, they're used by all groups. Like LinkedIn is a great example of that. Doesn't matter what industry you're in. Doesn't matter what your role is. LinkedIn is something that we all use. And so if we're talking about Manzama specifically, we provide these dashboards and email alerts across the organization for salespeople, business development and marketing, analysts or librarians, which will be interesting to all of you on the phone. Obviously, the way an analyst uses our system is going to be very, very different than the way someone in marketing or BD uses our technology, or someone in or a sales professional uses it. For the sales professional, maybe he or she is running quickly between meetings, and they're and they want to pull something up on their mobile device to be smarter about their client, so they don't put their foot in their mouth and miss something that's just happened with their client. Whereas an analyst is going to be building more complex reports, taking a deeper dive into information, publishing, doing things like that. And then I think the important thing with all these applications is that they talk to or work with your internal systems. So it's not, we don't want to have to, in the world today, have 14 different dashboards that we have to go to for things. We want all these things to work in concert with one another. And oftentimes that means bringing it into a portal like SharePoint within the enterprise, or working in concert with a CRM system like Salesforce. And that's something that these big data applications should really do as well. So, in summary, I think that the way we are all operating in the world today is quickly changing. And if you look at as long as people have been working, and sort of the timeline I went through, which went back to 1991, things are changing rapidly. And with regards to data, the amount of information that is available out in the world is growing, and it's a fantastic thing. I mean, there's a lot of great information in there, but I think, as we all know, it's a problem too. There's a lot of noise, there's a lot of irrelevant information. Technologies that can start to understand the user, just like on the consumer side of things, the professional and what they care about, and those systems that can serve as a filter in terms of relevance, to deliver to those users information that system knows that they will probably care about, are the types of technologies, I think, as we go forward, that are really going to resonate with professionals and help them to really kind of solve this problem. So with that, Michael, I thought I would turn it back over to you for any questions.
Yeah, thanks, Mark. Great job. Please submit your questions. I don't see any yet in via the questions pane. Mark, how do you help your clients or the users get over the hurdle of, what makes this different than Google, and, the whole ROI sort of hurdle that people are challenged with? Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, well, I think what makes us, if you think about Google and most search engines, they're really consumer products. There's a lot of manipulation of the information through SEM and SEO and advertising. We've seen a real opportunity in just providing a data set for the professional within our system. So, for instance, if I'm a salesperson, I'm looking for information around Apple or Disney, I probably don't care as much about the new Disney movie or the new Disney toy or the rides at Disneyland that might be being talked about in a teenage blog. So, in terms of what's in our database, when we talk about the big data in our system, it's really anything that is highly relevant from a business perspective. So already you've got people who are mining something or mining a set of data that's highly relevant. And then there's the finding versus searching. I mean, when we go into search engines, we search, the search engine returns results, and then we're able to click into things. You saw me go into our application a little bit, just some examples, but we do provide a framework for searching. However, we also provide a framework for finding, which is understanding the user and what they care about and who their clients are and what's important to them, issues, topics, legislation, whatever it is, and then delivering them a daily consolidated email around those topics, as well as a framework to where they can start to discover things that are closely aligned, yet they may not know about, around the topics that they do care about.
Great. Question from the audience. Does your system have a name to it?
The name is Manzama.
Okay, the name of the company. It's not a specific product.
Company
name.
And the name, yeah. I mean, basically, we do have additional kind of bolt-on products and services like SharePoint Web Parts and curation services and things like that. But really, we're kind of a one product, one company, layout.
Okay. Another question from Christine. Are there simple free sources to look at how frequently something is mentioned in the news blogs and where?
Could you repeat that question to me one more time, Michael?
Are there simple free sources to look at how frequently something is mentioned in news/blogs and where?
That's a great question, and I don't know of any free sources. I mean, I'm sure a search, you might just search for something to see if there's none that I'm aware of, but I would not be surprised if they exist out there.
So one of the questions I was going to have, just in case we didn't have any now they're flowing in, which is great, keep them coming, was, do you integrate any of the listening platform type tools and functionalities to, measure perception and impressions and whatnot? I think that's sort of where they're going on that. It's just typically there are none on free. Positive perception, negative type stuff.
We're starting to get into a little of that, and there are really good companies, like I pointed out, Radian6, that do that well, and they've done it for a while. What they don't do well is the whole highly relevant information to the professional piece. And so we saw an opportunity to go in a bit of a different direction. That said, we do have things in our application where users can, they can give things a thumbs up or a thumbs down. So from a sentiment perspective of our global users, we're getting a sentiment on, is this a highly relevant or useful article? Is this not a highly relevant or useful article? But I think what the question has to do with is what I was referring to earlier, which is sentiment around a company or a product. And that really gets to kind of the social integration piece, which we do some of that as well. Like we'll bring in Twitter and things like that. And actually, we provide a framework where we can bring in any real proprietary or subscription feed from a company. And oftentimes, those feeds will be internal information. So it could be a feed from another system like a Radian6 that you could actually pull into Manzama and have it sort of reveal itself within our application and within our framework of the personalized dashboard and the personalized email alert.
Great. Kind of piggybacking on that, do you integrate with CRM systems like Salesforce or those types?
We do.
Okay. Another question from Margaret. How do these types of services typically get funded within an organization, in your experience?
Yeah, that's a great question. Sometimes they will come out of one department's budget. Sometimes, the blessing and the curse of Manzama is that it works for everyone across the enterprise, right? And so what that means is that sometimes once our client understands that, they will oftentimes try to get buy-in or budget from other departments, which can make the buying process a bit longer. But oftentimes they just say, you know what, there's enough value here to where we're just going to buy it in our department, and then we will eventually roll out to these other different departments, and they can get the benefit of it as well. And the other thing we've seen is where, one department will take it, will buy it year one, year two, as those other departments are getting value, they'll go to a framework where, where the budget is split amongst the different departments.
Got it. Let's see here. Can you talk about how this is different from an aggregation service?
Yeah, that's a great question. So oftentimes we're mistakenly called an aggregator, and we don't love that label, obviously, because the aggregation part of what we do is a big part of what we do. I mean, we mine 70,000 sources globally, and we mine them, most of them every hour. So it's a massive churn on big data that we're pulling in. But I would argue that that's the easier part of what we do. I think what's more interesting about what we do is then delivering highly relevant stories, so not feeds or not entire sources or newsletters or whatever you want to call them, but highly relevant stories across the organization. And if you ask most professionals what they want and what they don't want is to spend the time vetting through a lot of information. That's what we're all doing today, and it's laborious, it's time-consuming, and what they want is they want the highly relevant story. And usually they don't care where it comes from. If it comes from the public domain, that's great. If it comes from a subscription source that the company subscribes to or the organization subscribes to, that's great too. So that's one thing that we do is we take that massive data and then we deliver those relevant stories enterprise-wide across the organization based on what that user cares about. The second part of what we do that's really interesting is we will analyze that data. So we'll go through those stories. So if I'm looking at Merck, let's say, and there's over 1,000 stories we're pulling in every month, I can understand without scanning 1,000 headlines what is in those 1,000 stories. The system will tell me what the 10 most frequently mentioned terms are. It will tell me what companies and rank them are also mentioned with Merck in those 1,000 stories. It will also cross-reference anything else in my profile. So if I've indicated that I care about intellectual property, and the system will see a word in the taxonomy in and around intellectual property, like patent, it will bring that story to my attention. And then you can dive as deep as you want to.
Got it. I got some really pointed questions here, and hopefully they don't put you on the spot, but let's see. Washington Post had a good article today on big data collection by government and civil rights. Your thoughts, please.
Well, I haven't read the article, so tough to give you my thoughts, but
sorry about that. I was hesitant to throw that one out there, but
oh, that's all right. But I just would comment, I guess, quickly that I think big data has applications beyond just what we're doing, which is mining it for for profit or from a commercial perspective. I think there's applications for big data from a human perspective, and there's all kinds of great information and studies and stories that are out there about how, even if you talk about, someone was telling me the other day about a company that's taking all the weather data that's out there in the world, and which a lot of it is free, but there's a ton of it, and they're basically mapping out weather for farmers to be able to get more production from their crops in their fields. And that's not just in the U.S. I mean, that's in places like Africa, where now when you got people empowered with mobile devices and things like that, they can actually be taking advantage of this sort of information. So anyways, I would just say that it's, again, I think I'm really excited about where the world's headed with the sort of democratization of information, and there's applications not just on a commercial level, but on a human level as well.
Great. How does Manzama deal with duplication of news stories? One press release might be found in a dozen different sources, so it's counted as one story or 12.
Right. Yeah, and that's a huge problem. I think we all know that the resyndication of information. News outlets know to tweak the headline just a little bit so that it will get out there as a separate story. Oftentimes it won't be sort of deduped. Within Manzama, we dedupe by exact title match, so we sort of consolidate all of those articles together. And we're working on an artificial intelligence technology that we hope to have rolled out this quarter, which will start to understand if an article headline or if the article itself has a 70–80% similarity to another article, and it will then group those together. And why that's important, I think, is not just from the standpoint of solving that problem of having to vet through duplicate articles about the same topic, but it also helps to unearth or uncover what I would call the nuggets or the smaller stories. And these are oftentimes the stories we see in industry publications, trade publications, and they're not going to be the kind of stories that are going to be on the front page of any newspaper. It could be that an executive left the company, or it could be that it was a small purchase of an asset like a factory, or maybe they just had a small round of layoffs, or whatever it is, and that oftentimes is where the competitive advantage in the information lies, because if you can understand the information at that level, that's probably not where your competitors are going to be able to compete, right? They'll know the big stories. We all know the big stories, but the trick is finding those little ones, and that's hard to do because of the massive information that's out there.
Another question from Jackie. What corporate departments use it the most? Corporate communications, investor relations?
I would say in our experience it's really marketing, business development. Our history as a company is we really started out in professional service organizations, accounting firms, law firms. It was immediately embraced by those departments. More and more now, buying decisions are coming out of the library within those organizations. But as we start to move into corporate America, or the corporate world, we're seeing those purchasing decisions come out of some different departments that were historically departments that we dealt with.
Got it.
Purchasing being.
Another question here. Do you make your source taxonomies, are they customizable, or are they one size fits all?
The source taxonomies, the answer is sort of both. I mean, you can build your own taxonomies in the system, but our content team here has already built pretty robust taxonomies around. So first of all, the system knows to look for any alias of a company, any subsidiary of a company, and even increasingly products of companies. So again, going back to the Merck example, the system will know certain drugs of Merck to look for. So there might be an article that just mentions a Merck drug but doesn't mention Merck, and the system now knows to tie that back to Merck. With regards to industries and topics, that's what our content team does really well. Is they'll go and they'll build out, and this is an active process. You're never able to say we're there, because these things are dynamic. They're always changing. But they will go through and build taxonomies around industry sectors, and other issues and topics, so that the system knows to look for those related terms.
Got it. Can you recommend any sources for firms looking to read about big data?
You saw me pull up a quote from Harvard Business Review. I find that they've got some really great articles on big data, and they're pretty frequent. That's mostly where I get my information. GigaOM, I mean, you've got some other online sources that are pretty good as well.
Okay.
Zeit, I think Zeit, for anyone who's not used Zeit, it's a great and somewhat similar to what we do. I mean, they do it from a consumer perspective, but again, if we're talking about big data and we're talking about the personalization of information, Zeit does a pretty good job. So I'm not sure, but you know, they have topics on Zeit, and I'm not sure, but I'd be surprised if big data wasn't one of them.
Okay, great. Last final question, let's some more keep popping in here. From Carol, how do you keep track of the possible number of news sources? And it says, is the 70,000 fixed?
The 70,000 is not fixed. It's growing. I mean, we started out in our first year with 1, and then it went to 1,000 and 20,000 and 40,000. And we're, you know, the trick is, again, our content team goes through and they vet sources, and we don't just add any source for the sake of adding a source. It's got to meet our criteria for being a reputable source. It's got to have relevance from a business perspective, and you know, and then we're really kind of moving fast across the globe in terms of becoming more international in our scope of content. Whereas when we started, we were more U.S. centric. And so yeah, that's not a fixed number. It's growing, and there's a criteria that our content team uses to, you know, one of those is just suggestions from our clients, which if they find a site that it used to happen more and more in the early days, it doesn't happen as much anymore. But if they find a source that they think should be in our system, they can let us know, and we don't just add it automatically. It goes through our normal vetting process. You know, we're adding sources all the time.
Great. Well, that's all the questions we have. Actually, one more came in. Are there any case studies or success stories you can share with an actual use case scenario?
Yeah, we've got a bunch of case studies on our website, so I'd encourage anyone to go check out our website, www.manzama.com, I think under success stories. But I'll tell you one in particular that I've always thought was a great success story. There was a business developer at a law firm in New York, and this business developer found a tweet in Manzama about one of their clients, and their clients was a company that was an equipment manufacturer. They made sporting equipment, and the tweet was actually from a plaintiff firm that was reaching out to consumers saying, have you had problems with this piece of equipment? It was a skateboard helmet. And they were doing that via Twitter, and it was pretty clear to her that this was the early stage of a class action solicitation. And so she took that piece of information to the partner that had the relationship with the client, said, you know, did you know about this? And he said, no, I had no idea. He then took that piece of information to his client, which was the general counsel inside of this company, and said, you know, we found this. Were you aware of this? And she said, no, we had no idea. And so suffice it to say that that law firm, I mean, that's just something that law firms don't do. Most of them they're very good at helping you with your problem once it sort of blows up, but they're not as good as being proactive partners, if you will. And that was a great example where that was the company was able to prepare and defend itself from what it looked like was something that was imminent. And of course, they ended up giving a lot more business in the future to that law firm. So that was one that I really like because it was predictive in nature, it was proactive in nature, and it was just a great illustration of the power of the system and being able to get those insights quickly.
That's great. I guess you struck a nerve in the law firm world. Of your clients, what is the percentage that you've found of where the attorneys are actually using the system versus, you know, some admins kind of pushing out alerts or relevant sort of tweets?